In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Good morning. So life is filled with a whole bunch of if-only statements, if-only moments in life. Let me share with you what I mean. Some of us say, well, if only I wasn't speeding so fast, or if only I was passing this road 5 minutes earlier, this cop wouldn't have been here and I wouldn't have gotten the speeding ticket. If only. If only I wasn't texting on my phone when I had this accident. If only I would have studied a little bit harder, I would have gotten the grade that I needed on this test in order to get the grade I needed in the class. We have a bunch of if-only statements where we look back and we realize that we were acting in a certain way that wasn't conducive towards the result we were desiring for. And so we look back and we say, if only. But see, there's varying degrees of if-only statements. Those are easy ones. Those are easy ones. Another easy one, if only I had bought 10 more raffle tickets, I would have won the prize. They would have called my number. We have a bunch of if-only statements. But see, as we also progress through life, our if-only statements carry more weight. And not only do they carry more weight, but they also carry more pain. Someone at the end of their life may say, well, if only I would have realized that working so much wasn't really what my wife wanted. If only I would have realized that, maybe I should have taken a little bit more time off of work to be more involved in the lives of my children. I would have a better relationship with them when they got older. If only I knew that. If only somebody had really warned me that having premarital sex would be so detrimental to my life, I would have chose differently. We make a lot of mistakes, and we look back, and everybody here can recall an if-only moment. If only I would have known better. Only somebody would have told me. If only I would have realized that in the days of my youth, these were the prime time, this was the best time in my life to really lay a foundation in my relationship with God. Then I wouldn't have squandered my life and realized that God is really who I need later on. And at the age of 40 or 50, I wouldn't be building a foundation with God. I would have already one laid. Now I only have a couple decades left to really live with God. If only I would have known. We all have if-only statements. We all have if-only moments. We all have if-only mistakes. Some of them have very small consequences. Some of them keep us turning at night. Some of them keep us filled with regret. Some of them make us walk around with guilt and shame. If only I would have known. If only. Everybody has if only in their life. So today's gospel, there's a big if only. There's a big if only. But the beauty about if only, because if only is like a big warning sign. Okay? But behind every if only, there's a little jewel. There's a little jewel, a precious jewel, behind every if only statement. In the shadow of every if only moment in life, there's a jewel. There was a very, very precious jewel in today's gospel. There's a very, very precious jewel in today's gospel, but it's only found in the shadow of if only. And it's how we deal with if only that determines whether or not we find the precious jewel. So if we look at today's gospel, it's a story that many of us may be familiar with, but I'd like to just take a little bit of time to just kind of recap and set it up, also because I tend to run ahead of schedule, and I don't like praying a very slow liturgy. So we're going to take our time today. So Jesus had a very unique relationship with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He would go to their house quite frequently whenever he was in town. Our first interaction really with the two of them, not so much Lazarus, was when Jesus was at their house and Mary and Martha were really playing host. We don't really know what Lazarus was doing during this celebration, but we know that Martha was so busy, consumed with plans, consumed with entertaining people. And while she was so consumed with entertaining people, there was a burning part inside of her that was so upset at her sister Mary, who was not helping with any of the preparations, who was just sitting at the feet of Jesus, acting like their house was not filled with 1 million people. She was burning. And she reacted based on what she was feeling on the inside and had the audacity to go up to Jesus Christ, God incarnate, and say, Lord, you tell Mary what to do. Pretty much saying, Lord, you are unaware of the situation, and I'm going to instruct you on how to deal with the situation. That's kind of the first impression, the first picture that we have of Mary and Martha. And there are many others, okay, but we're going to fast forward to later on. We know that this was a very unique relationship that Jesus had with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And so, as Jesus was out doing ministry with his disciples, he receives word that Lazarus, whom you love, the brother of Mary and Martha, is sick. And they're requesting you to come and to heal, because they know who Jesus was. They sort of knew who Jesus was. Okay? And they had seen him do many miracles. They had seen him heal the sick. They had seen him do many wondrous things. They knew that this fever, this sickness that Lazarus had, although serious, was no problem for Jesus. And so they put in a special request, kind of a personal favor. And we made a request saying, Jesus, come. Lazarus, who you love, he's sick, and this is serious. This is serious enough to us, and we are worried enough that we are really requesting that you come, and come quickly. And the gospel tells us that though he loved him, and though he loved the family, he waited. He waited. And by our standards, when you hear that somebody is seriously sick, waiting is not the first response. We don't equate loving somebody and then hearing a very urgent request from them. We don't equate waiting with loving. But it was love. It was Jesus' love. It was a unique love. So they made a request. He got the request. And he said, I'm going to wait a couple more days. And then eventually, he decides to travel with his disciples and go into Jerusalem. And his disciples saying, Jesus, Pharisees, they are looking to kill you. They are looking to kill you. This is not a good idea. We understand that you love Lazarus, but let's not go back. Not right now. It's too hostile. Too much is at stake. Your life is precious. And he said, it's time to go. It's time to go. And so as he traveled into town, approaching Bethany, which is about 2 miles away from Jerusalem, he meets Martha. He meets Martha first. And he always has this unique relationship with Martha, and she's the one who's going to be our focus of today. And so when he meets Martha, when Jesus meets Martha, Martha starts off Let me read it here. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So she starts off with the guilt treatment. But even now I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you. So Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Jesus answered the question. Jesus was addressing her pain. She said, I know whatever you say, God will give you. And Jesus read between the lines. He said, okay, your brother's going to live. Your brother will rise again. But Martha had a problem. Although Martha knew that Jesus could heal, he could make eyes from nothing, that he could feed 5,000, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and then do it again with 4,000, though she knew all this, inside her heart was doubt. How do we see the doubt? But even now, I know, this is what Martha responded, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Said, thank you, Jesus, for your nice words, but he is now dead. He is now dead. He is now gone. We sent you enough time, enough warning, and he is now dead. I'll see him the last day. I'll see him the last day. Are you going to bring him back from the dead? It's been 4 days. It's been 4 days. There's doubt. There's doubt. So it's kind of a bitter exchange, I would say, between Martha and Jesus. And then Martha goes tell Mary, and Mary comes back, and Mary kind of has a very similar conversation with Jesus. But eventually, they make it to the tomb. And Jesus asks, where have you laid him? And they lead him to where his tomb is. I want to pause because I want to share, there's a song that my son and I, whenever we listen to it in the car, to put it plainly, we just have fun. We rock out in the car. We wave our hands, we sing loud, we enjoy. But there's one line in the song that I love the most, because the song is talking about difficult times. The song is talking about when life just won't play along and everything right keeps going wrong, I'm going to keep on moving. But there's a line that I love in the song that says, I just might bend, but I won't break. I just might bend, but I won't break. Jesus has bent Martha. He has bent her to the core. But Jesus is really good at bending people. He's really good at bending people. If we look historically, nobody bent people better than Jesus. Nobody bent people better than God. And he has a long history of doing this. If we look, Abraham, he bent them real good when he said, give me Isaac. Bent them real good, but he didn't break them. He bent Joseph really well when he gave him the vision. Then at the age of 17, he was sold by his brothers, betrayed by his brothers, prison here, prison there, slave here, slave there, finally became second to Pharaoh. He bent him real good. And it wasn't until in his early 40s, some say 42, 43, that Joseph finally reconciled. From the age of 17 to the age of 42, 43, God was bending Joseph. Moses, he bent for 40 years in the wilderness, running away from the mistake of killing the Egyptian, running away from his past. He bent him. Then he bent him even further and he said, okay, go to Pharaoh. He bent David really well when he said, all right, David, I anoint you as king, but you're going to run for your life for about 10 to 13 years. You're going to be haunted. You're going to be hunted by King Saul. See, God is really good at bending. And sometimes it feels unfair, and sometimes it's just plain painful. But see, God did not only bend us, he bent his only son. He bent his only son. He bent them when he put him on the cross, knowing that he was the only one who he could bend up until death, and even from the death, rise again. God has a long history of bending us. Many of us can look at our lives and realize right now, I'm being bent. But see, it's how we deal with the bending that makes all the difference in the world. Because some of us may bend and we may not deal with it, and then we'll look back and say, if only I had dealt with my situation better, I would have found the jewel hiding in the shadows of being bent. If only I would have dealt with it better, if only I would have been kinder, I would have found and come across the jewel that sits in the shadow of us being bent to the point of almost breaking. In the Pauline epistle of today, Paul was writing to the Philippians, and he said in verse 29, "For it has been granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but to also suffer for his sake." Philippians 1:29 says, For to you it has been granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. See, what this verse does is it closely links belief and suffering. It closely links belief and suffering, and it almost says that essentially, like, it is difficult to believe without sacrifice. It is difficult to stand behind something without sacrifice, without suffering. If you look at it, even played out in society, secular society, we see this to be true. If you look at teams who really stick together, who play for one another, it's because they suffered with each other in practice. A parent who suffers to raise their child will stand by their child, no matter what the opposition says, no matter what the situation is. Why? Because you had suffered with your child. You had sacrificed for your child. When things get rocky in any sort of organization, those who have committed most, those who have sacrificed most for the organization, are the last ones to leave, if they ever leave. Why? Because they believe in the organization and they have sacrifice. Believing and suffering and sacrifice are so closely linked that it is so difficult to really believe in something without having sacrificed anything for it. Belief, true belief, and sacrifice are so closely linked that it is essentially impossible to have a firm belief in anything without sacrificing. Why does one member of the marriage wants to leave, and the other who has sacrificed so much wants to stay and make it work? Why? Because they believe it can work because they have sacrificed so much. Whereas the other spouse who didn't do their good share in the marriage, has not sacrificed for the marriage, has not put the marriage before himself or herself, they're the ones ready to leave. Why? Because believing is so closely linked to sacrifice. The two are essentially inseparable. You don't sacrifice for things you don't believe in. You don't truly sacrifice for things you don't believe in. But the only way to believe in something is to sacrifice for it. People who have gone on to create such organizations that feed so many poor people in this world, they made a lot of sacrifice. Why? Because they believed in the cause. They believed in what they're doing. And so the sacrifice that they would lay down their finances. Many people have sold their homes, have gone to move somewhere else in the poor populations. Why? Because they believe in the cause. What tells us they believed in the cause? The sacrifice that stands behind the belief. Belief and sacrifice are inseparable. Belief and sacrifice are inseparable. God is very good at what he does. He is the best. There is none like him. He appreciates this link between belief and sacrifice. And so, he believes in it so much that one, he put his money where his mouth is, and he sacrificed his son. Because he believed in you and me. He believed in our value. How do we know he believed in our value? He sacrificed for it. He wants us to understand what true belief is. So he pushes us. Does he make it easy? No. He makes it hard. He puts us through the ringers. He put Martha through the ringers. Not only was Martha bitter about Jesus not coming earlier, but if I was Martha, I'd be upset that he is going up to the grave. And not only that he is going up to the grave, but he's saying, remove the stone. Remove the stone. If I was Martha, I would feel like somebody's opening up my chest, taking my heart, wringing it out, stepping on it. That's what I would feel if I was Martha. But this is where the if only comes in. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? That if you would believe, you would see the glory of God. This is Martha's if only moment. She was the sibling. She was the one who had to consent to this. She was the one who went along with Jesus saying, okay, move the stone away. This is Martha's if only moment. Kind of only comes once. But behind the if only moment, behind the moment where you feel that your heart is being taken out of your chest, squashed and stepped on because it is too painful, you only get to go through it once. And how you deal with it, how Martha deals with it, determines whether or not she finds the jewel. And here, Jesus said, this is the jewel. The jewel is that you would see the glory of God. The jewel is that you will see the glory of God, not just in the resurrection of your brother. That's face value. That's miraculous. That's glorious, yes. Not denying that. But the greatest jewel is in what happens to Martha. The greatest jewel, the glory of God, is most seen in what happens to Martha. Martha, before she got to this point, said this. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come in the world. That is what Martha said when Jesus first walked into town. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. You take Martha's statement, and you tell me, when does it mean most? When do you actually take Martha's statement and believe it? Pre-resurrection of Lazarus, post-resurrection of Lazarus. If Martha, she said this before the resurrection of Lazarus. She said, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. You tell me, she says it again after Lazarus rises from the dead. Does that statement mean the same? It's impossible. It's impossible for her to believe that statement the same way she believed it and said it before Lazarus rose from the dead. You take it after Lazarus rose from the dead, that statement that confession of belief in Martha is 100% different. It is a statement of conviction. It is a statement that somebody who really, really deeply believes in Jesus, that's a statement that they say. But see, you never get to that deeper meaning. You never get to that without being bent. We never get to that in our lives without being bent first. Why? Because belief and sacrifice are so closely linked that it is impossible to believe something with your whole heart, with your mind, and with your soul without having sacrificed for it. Belief and sacrifice are too closely linked to have them apart. That's why Jesus bent her. Because he wanted her to see the glory of God. Not in the resurrection, not in the solving of the problem, but in the conviction of the heart. Because of the heart that truly believes that this is the Son of Man, that this is the Son of God who has come and died for me, lives completely different than somebody who just says it. She said, "Yes, Lord, I believe that he will rise the last day." He said, "Martha, he's going to rise today." She didn't believe it before. She believes it now. In between, sacrifice. Sacrifice leads to belief. But see, sometimes we're not sure how we dealt with the situation. Sometimes it seems as though God bends too much that we just snap. Seems like he was just putting too much pressure, and then we break. How do we know if we've broken or not? How do we know if we're broken or not? One of the easiest ways to tell if you're broken or not is how you respond to others. You can judge if you have been broken or just bent really good in how you respond to others. Because somebody who is snapped, that's a bitter person. Somebody who is bent but comes back stronger, they impart two things on the people around them. They impart encouragement and they impart hope. They impart encouragement and they impart hope. Because somebody who is bent and seen the other side and has seen the jewel that is sitting behind the shadow of their being bent, looks at somebody else who's being bent and he says, "Hold on." He says, on the other side of this, there's a jewel. It's the glory of God being revealed in your life. It's the belief and the faith that God is building inside of you that you need to hold on to. But somebody who's been bent and broken says, "Leave the situation. Get out of here. It's too difficult to deal with. What's the point of it? You're just going to walk around with all this pain and suffering, and there's no point at the end of it. You're just going to be an angry person, so save yourself all the trouble and leave the situation." The two responses are completely different. Somebody who is bent and been broken because of a bad marriage, what kind of marriage advice do you think they give? Versus somebody who's been bent in their marriage, has gone on to survive, and gone on to have a healthier marriage, what kind of marriage advice do they give? There's a difference. So where are you? Where am I? In the situations of life where we have been bent, do we look at others and do we impart bitterness? Do we impart a back road out of the situation? Or do we say, "Hold on. We'll commit to praying about this. Let's read some resources about this." Because there is a purpose behind it. The purpose is the jewel that sits in the shadow of being bent. And one day, you look back and you get to say, if only once in the situation. You get to say, if only once in some situations. If only I would have hold on and been faithful and persevered, I will find the glory of God. And that glory of God imparts hope and encouragement to others. But when we have missed a situation, we have dealt with it poorly, when all we could see was face value the problem and not the jewel behind the problem, we impart bitterness, resentment, anger, no encouragement. Where do you stand? Where do I stand? This needs to be a place where I impart encouragement to you and hope, and you impart it to me. And when this is a place filled with encouragement and hope, then out there, we get to provide the same. But when we're being bent, don't look back and just say, if only I would have known. We know now from this story that behind every bending is a jewel hidden in the shadows. Difficult to get to? Absolutely. Priceless and worth the bending? 100%. That's why God chose it with His only begotten Son. And glory be to God forever. Amen.